Hi, welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, the state Senate has, I can't imagine an array of more important issues that it's taking up. We have State Senator Mike Brubaker. He chairs the Senate Finance Committee, and then a duo of the state's leading journalists are going to weigh in on other important legislative matters. All of that follows these words.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Hi, welcome back to the program. We're going to get right to it. Sitting across from me is Senator Mike Brubaker from Lancaster County. He chairs the Senate Finance. Senator, very quickly, I don't remember a time, when the legislature has so much really significant issues. Now, you've been there for a while. Am I right about that? I mean, just huge issues.
Well, Terry, you're right on. We have these aren't small issues.
That's right.
And they're not one or two issues, there are many. And we need to get some or all of these done in order to make the governor's budget. So it is difficult, at least. And some members of the General Assembly call this the silly season. And when I try to figure out what that means, what they're trying to say is this is when tempers start to flare.
Yeah,
this
I noticed.
is when really members really start to dig in on their issues.
Well, these are important issues.
They are.
All right, let's go. I want to talk about a couple of things. I want to talk about pensions. I'm going to talk a little bit about the lottery and then your legislation on charitable institutions. But let's start first of all with the privatization of alcohol. How, this bill finally moving into a position where the Senate's going to get it. What's your sense about what's going to happen there?
Well, today is Thursday, the day of this taping, and today's the day the House very likely will make a vote. Yes, and if I have to guess, I'd say they're going to vote in the affirmative. That moves liquor from the House to the Senate. The Senate said last session that we're not going to invest time and effort on this if the House and the governor collectively can't get it out of the House, and they didn't.
Now they did.
Now this time,
it looks like they will.
Looks like they will.
Okay.
So there's no doubt that the Senate's going to need to take this up. There's no doubt about it.
Does the hybrid? It's a hybrid now. It's not a full, complete, total privatization at first. It's phased in. You got the beer distributors and the brewers and the folks who make beer like Anheuser-Busch upset about some aspects of it. Do you think it's possible for the Senate to reach a compromise? You're obviously going to amend this bill. Nobody in their right mind thinks you won't. Is it possible that you can do something with this?
Well, I want to concur with what you just said, that I do believe that we will amend it.
Okay.
So the House at one point had 160-some amendments teed up, ready to go. They didn't all run. That's right. But that's a huge number of amendments. We won't do that in the Senate, but we're going to amend it. So that means we either send it back and ultimately
there's going to be a lot of pressure on you, both for and against it, Senator. Let's be honest. You're going to have huge pressure on you.
You're right, Terry. But I represent Lancaster County, as you well know, where you're from. And an awful lot of Lancastrians are of a mindset that sale and promotion of liquor is not a business that the state should be involved in. The state should be involved in really hard, strict enforcement, especially in misuse, underage drinking, over-drinking.
I'm going to interpret that as Senator Brubaker is leaning towards support. Is that fair?
Well, that is fair. I'm a pro-privatization person. I really am. I think government we have government creep, and we need to start to reread the Constitution over and over and over again, make sure that government's doing what we have a constitutional obligation to do. $41 billion in pension debt, the two big state pensions. There are estimates now, $50, $60 billion range. We have this debt. That's before your committee. There are a variety of ideas about what to do about it. Some say go to a 401k plan. Some say reduce the benefits moving forward for current employees covered by the two pension systems, not to change their benefits now. Wow, and there's no consensus. It's in your lap, Senator. What are you going to do about it? You're going from liquor to pensions. You're taking the two hottest issues of the state, and you're laying them right on my lap.
Why not?
All right, I like your style. Pensions are before the Senate Finance Committee. We held a hearing last session. We'll hold more hearings. Senate Bill 2 is prime sponsored by Senator Pat Brown. I support that bill. That makes substantive changes to employees that have not yet started. So you'll come right back to me and say, well, Mike, that does nothing for the $40 to $60 billion of unfunded obligation. I would say that's right. It does little in the short term, I should say little in the long term, almost nothing in the short term. So I support the bill. I think Senator Pat Brown's right on, but I think we need to do more.
Okay.
The governor's proposing to do more. More brings controversy, it loses votes, and it's for sure to bring us into the court system, into a legal battle.
Yeah, you'll end up in a legal battle. Well, let's run to a break. When we come back, I want to talk about the lottery, and I want to talk about your charitable institutions bill. All right, we'll be back following these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania Business Council Education Foundation, educating citizens and business leaders about important public policy issues and civic affairs. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by BetterSaferRoads.com. To voice your support for safer highways and less traffic congestion, visit BetterSaferRoads.com. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Hi, welcome back to the program. We're talking with Senator Mike Brubaker. He chairs the Finance Committee that's dealing with some of the most significant issues that the legislature has taken up in recent years. Pensions, lottery. Senator, before I talk a little bit about lottery privatization, which is very controversial, I want to talk about charitable institutions. Who gets to define what a charity is for purposes, obviously, of taxation, And you got legislation through, a little partisan vote on it. Explain why you felt you needed to amend a law that was passed several years about charitable institutions and who gets to determine whether or not, for purposes of taxes, they're charitable.
Well, thanks, Terry. It gets a little complex, but the simple most simple way to explain it is it's Senate Bill 4. It passed out of Senate Finance Committee 9-2. Then it passed off the Senate floor yesterday. Right. All Republicans voting for it, and we did get 2 Democratic members voting for it as well. So I'm glad to be able to call it a bipartisan support off the Senate floor. Then it goes to the House. This would change the Constitution of Pennsylvania, and you know better than anybody just how long tough process. So people are saying it's fast-tracked. You can't fast-track constitutional change. So 2 consecutive votes in the House and the Senate. This exact same bill, Terry, passed last session, 46-1 out of the Senate. And now all of a sudden, all the controversy. Bottom line for me is who will determine, as you just said, who will determine in the future what is a purely public charity in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania? Will it primarily be the court system, or will the General Assembly have a role, as our Constitution clearly states that we do have a role? So I want to put that question to the people. So if we're successful in the passage of Senate Bill 4, 2 consecutive sessions, ultimately it goes to the people, and then the people will decide.
Now, this is pretty important, because, look, particularly in urban, it affects the whole state, but urban areas in particular, cities, large numbers of charities, hospitals, education institutions, churches. Cities are having tough times, with taxation purposes. The argument on the other side is that there's concerns that will affect the tax status of institutions that need the tax break. But on the other hand, the municipalities need the revenue, which they don't get. They get some taxes in lieu of that, but not sufficient, cities would argue, to help their needs. How does that play out?
False argument. False argument.
Okay.
We've had Act 55 for 15 years. That's going to be the model. The Supreme Court decision did not invalidate Act 55. Might we need to tweak Act 55? Yes. But again, it keeps coming back to if Senate 4 passes and ultimately is within our new Constitution.
Why did it become so partisan all of a sudden? As you said before, why you got, 20 votes against it? 2 Democrats voted for it. I guess a couple Republicans voted against it, right?
No, all Republicans voted
okay.
for it, and 2 Republicans voted for it.
What's at the heart of the
Well, I asked that on the Senate floor yesterday. How could we have a 46-1 vote in favor of the exact same language 6 months prior?
Yeah.
What happened?
I'm asking you.
Well, the answer that I got back on the Senate floor, they didn't say it this way, is they read the bill, and/or there are some constituencies that are fearful that a lot more not-for-profits will go in the books. That fear will not materialize.
Okay.
And in the end, Terry, how can you say no to the people of Pennsylvania making this decision on who will be the final arbitrator?
All right, we only have about a minute and a half. We'll have you back when we get to this other issue because it's not going away. It's lottery, the privatization of the management of the lottery, turning it over to a private company. The Attorney General says, no, this can't be done. Governor Corbett wants to do it. The legislature has a role to play. What role do you all think you need to play in this? It's in your committee.
This is huge. Thanks. We have to do it in a minute or less, you say. Lottery makes $1 billion of profit. That's net every year. Every penny of that goes into senior services.
Right.
So our senior programs are paid for exclusively out of lottery. So the governor wants to privatize. Yes, that's a PMA, private management agreement. But it's not just a PMA. It's PMA plus expansion. And that's where the General Assembly starts to get concerned. So it's one thing for a private sector company to run it, but it's another issue. Now members get really weary when we start talking about this new game called Keno and home-based internet gaming.
And that would be, you would argue, within the purview of the legislature, regardless of the management. Would that be your position? Would that be your concern anyway?
Well, the 1972 law is certainly under scrutiny. So the governor's top attorneys believe what he did is constitutional. As you said, the Attorney General's top attorneys say what he did was not constitutional. What they're doing right now, as of this taping, is the Corbett administration is working with Camelot and with the Attorney General's office to clarify that existing contract. I did hold a hearing as the Senate Finance Chair. I'm committed to hold another hearing.
Not very popular with the voters, may I point out. I mean, just to weigh in on that angle. I mean, but,
I do read your polls.
Good. All right, thanks, Senator. We'll have you back. We've got a bunch of stuff that's pretty important stuff, huge policy issues. All right, we have a duo of Pennsylvania's leading reporters in here. We're going to catch up on what's going on in the legislature, and maybe we'll get him to weigh in on what Senator Brubaker said. We'll have fun with that following these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the State System of Higher Education. 14 state-owned universities. The state system is the largest provider of higher education in Pennsylvania. And by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania.
Hi, welcome back to the program. We're going to get into a bunch of these subjects, and one subject it's gotten some press, but not a lot of press, with two of the state's leading reporters. They cover the state capitol for their respective media outlets. Mary Wilson, she's been on the program many times, Pennsylvania Public Radio. Karen Langley with the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. All right, Karen, I think most of us were surprised when Senator Lloyd Schmucker, Lancaster County, introduces a bill that would allow the illegal, undocumented students to attend public institutions at getting in-student tuition rates. I mean, conservatives look like they're now, both nationally and in our state, coming around more on, I won't call it immigration reform, whatever it is. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, that's right. The other day we had a Republican state senator holding a press conference in the Capitol and standing up there with some young people who introduced themselves as undocumented immigrants, and proposing that that those young people should be eligible for the same in-state tuition breaks that that legal documented Pennsylvania students receive. And he said that there are also among the co-sponsors several other Republican senators, including the Senate Majority Leader Dominic Pileggi.
He signed on to the bill.
He did. He has.
Yeah. I think the argument, Mary, is that these young folks are here, that helping them get an education not just good for them, but good for the economy, I think. Is that the point that Senator Schmucker was making?
Yeah, I think that the big argument they're relying on here is an economic one, in that these are kids who are here anyway. They've been brought here by their parents. They've gone to high school in Pennsylvania. That's one of the requirements of the bill, that they have to graduate from a Pennsylvania high school. They have to have a few years of residence here. Yeah. And then they get, and then, you know, to give them the in-state tuition rates would be to allow them to go to college. The argument here is that otherwise they're not able to go, that the prices are too high. Sometimes they're not just paying out-of-state tuition rates, but they're paying international student rates, which the Senator Schmucker said could be as much as twice as much, 2.5 times.
Yeah, the reason I'm bringing this up is this sort of a break. I mean, I'm going to read you what the House GOP spokesman Steve Mishkin said. We fully support legal immigration, but we do not support people breaking the law. And in a sense, what this is, you're subsidizing and incentivizing people breaking the law. So the prospects for this don't look all that good, Karen. If over in the House, you've got, you know, the spokesperson for the House leadership saying, well, maybe not so fast. Is there any sense that this bill is going to go anywhere? I mean, that's the bigger point I'm asking you.
I mean, I guess it's a little bit early to say beyond that indication that we've gotten that House leadership might not be too receptive to this, but those, you know, certainly are kind of strong words, talking about a bill that's just been introduced. Yeah, well, it's
not even been brought. I mean, whether it even gets out of a committee or not in the Senate, right? Mary, go ahead, finish my thought.
No, I mean, exactly right. This bill hasn't been, there's been no hearing, there's been no, like, you know, larger debate about it. It's going to go to a committee. We don't even know which committee it's going to go to yet. So there are a lot of questions that have yet to be answered. So, you know, just because, you know, the majority leader's name is on it, we don't know yet how it's going to go through the Senate.
All right, well, let's run to a break. When I come back, I want to ask these reporters, I mean, they've been covering the legislature. I mean, there is so many huge issues. What it is they think the legislature might get done, liquor privatization, pensions. We talked about some of those with Senator Brubaker. We'll be back talking about money. We'll have to pay our bills right now.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Highmark Blue Shield, changing the way health plans work for business with a variety of plan options for employers and more choices for employees. Information is available at highmark.com. Have a greater hand in your company's health. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care.
Welcome back to the program. Well, I don't think there's any doubt that it's rare to see the legislature taking up such a wealth, if you will, of subject matter. I mean, just huge issues that many of which have a lot to say about the future. Mary, why don't you sort of run through the 3 or 4 big issues, and then I'll ask Karen about, you know, what's the prospects for them.
Sure. So a lot of them were talked about with his budget address. We've got liquor privatization, which looks like it's headed to the Senate. We've got pensions. The governor wants to overhaul state's pension, the two pension systems, and try to fix, you know, its current $41 billion in unfunded liabilities. Privatization of the lottery is still hanging out there as an issue, and we've got transportation funding. The governor has rolled out a transportation funding plan.
Yeah, plus, Karen, we have you know what, I'll tell you what's sort of fascinating that we've not heard anything about. The actual budget. You know, the recommendation for a 2.4% increase in the overall budget. It's as though, okay, that's fine. And I'm not suggesting that these other issues aren't important, as Mary pointed out. They're huge issues that have to do not just with the short term, but the long-term future of our state. But you don't hear almost any debate about the specifics, if you will, of the budget itself. Is that true? Have you been, I mean, go ahead.
I think that's right. And it seems like perhaps in this budget proposal, there's less specific proposed cuts, for example, than in the past few years for people to rally around and pinpoint at this point. I think that a lot of the other big issues that Mary just mentioned are things that probably are also going to get wrapped up in the budget negotiations as we get towards June 30th. So I think that we will start hearing more about the specifics of the budget as folks start to advocate for those other different big reforms.
But wouldn't you say that's a 2.4% increase in spending last year? It's the first time. First two budgets, less spending than the previous year. Well, the second budget, both budgets, spending less than the previous year, an increase now. But you don't expect huge changes in the governor's overall budget, do you? I mean, you haven't heard anything.
No, and I think the writing was on the wall when he said, when the governor said with his budget address, this is a year where we can, and he basically said we can let our bellies out a little bit this year.
Right.
Like last year, past 2 years, we've had to reduce the deficit, get rid of the deficit, and this year we've got a little bit of breathing room. You hear a little bit of debate, Terry. You hear a little bit of debate about a proposal that would close regional health centers throughout the state. But big things that were big flashpoints last year, like state funding for the state-relateds and the state-owned universities, that was a deal there was a deal on that before there was a budget. So that wasn't the big controversy that it was in years past.
What's sort of fascinating? We heard a little bit about the sequestration cuts and how they might affect the state with the closure, with air traffic controllers and, some state airports might have a reduction in personnel. But has there been much discussion, have you heard in the legislature about that? I haven't heard a lot about that.
I have not. I wrote about this topic a little bit before the sequester was going to take effect, but I at least have not heard a lot since then. I think that that some of the cuts, for example, in public education are things that wouldn't be felt for some time. So maybe we'll be hearing
So you're
more
right.
of Congress as a
I've been
result of
saying
this.
all along that one of the problems with crying wolf, so to speak, early was that the cuts haven't manifested themselves, and therefore the voters are looking at this not thinking whether it's serious or not. We'll find out for sure in weeks ahead. But same for you. You did some stories originally on that.
Right.
Go ahead.
Right, and I think I just chalked that up to it not being a state issue. Like it's not something that the legislature is going to control. They could certainly beat a drum about it, but that's something that's controlled in D.C. So I would imagine we'd hear from Senator Casey and Senator Toomey about that. We have.
All right, we have less. Go ahead. Did you want to add something?
Well, I was just going to say the one thing that the governor's budget office had said before the sequester took effect is that to the extent that they lost federal money, the state wasn't in a position to replace that. So if this drags on for months and months, maybe we'll be hearing more about it in June when people are trying to finalize numbers.
And that's probably the governor has mentioned on this program the concern about Medicaid, the fact that in out years it will cost additional money, and there's a big argument on that goes around. No indication.
This is about Medicaid expansion, you're saying?
But he hasn't closed the door on that.
Yeah, that's correct.
It's not.
It's
pushed,
it's
but
barely
not locked.
a jar, right?
It's barely a jar. Okay. Mary gets the last word. All right. We'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, stay well.